As Nintendo fans, we are in a very unique spot right now. A very rare spot that only happens once per console generation. We know that we're on the cusp of Nintendo's next generation console, with Nintendo outright confirming that we will see it within the next several months. But we are also still interested in seeing what the Switch is bringing to the table until then. We already know that we're getting a Nintendo Direct any day now, so what will the last year of the Switch era look like? Do we really have big announcements coming up? How long can we expect the Switch to be supported? And will we finally see Metroid Prime 4? Let's talk about it. My name is Elias with Possibility Button. So the thing that really gets me is, this very well could be the final main Nintendo Direct of the Nintendo Switch era. We know that Nintendo's focus is switching to their next generation console pretty soon, and that feels kind of evident by the fact that so far this year, we've gotten some smaller games like Princess Peach Showtime and a whole bunch of remasters. And we don't really have anything on the horizon as far as Switch games in the realm of big mainline sequels. We just got the next Zelda game, we just got the next 2D Mario game, we just got a Pikmin, we just got a Kirby a couple years ago. I don't know about you, but it kinda looks like Nintendo is all hands on deck for next generation sequels. At the same time, by virtue of even having a Nintendo Direct focused on the Switch, they've got to have something to announce, right? And this conversation only gets more interesting when you look at some of the recent comments by the company in regards to their next generation strategy. For example, back in November last year, they said, and I quote, "Nintendo Switch will be entering its 8th year in March 2024. We will continue to release new titles and content for Nintendo Switch without being bound by the traditional concept of the platform lifecycle. Going forward, we would like to continue to see many consumers play Nintendo Switch and to maintain our business momentum." And of course, more recently back in May, when President Shintaro Furukawa was asked what the next system will be like, if it's more iterative on the Switch or a brand new concept, apparently he replied, "Switch Next model is the appropriate way to describe it." So we're at an interesting crossroads here. On one hand, Nintendo wants to push its resources into fueling the next generation, which is totally understandable. And I think we've seen that by the fact that, well, we just don't really have a lot of big announcements so far. Maybe we're getting some in this Direct, but you'd think we'd have something more to look forward to by now. And we can see in things like Tears of the Kingdom DLC, right? Why didn't we get Tears of the Kingdom DLC? It should have been pretty easy. Basically just do another Master Quest or something similar to what Breath of the Wild did. You're printing money. Well, personally, I'm of the opinion that likely the Zelda team is in full force working on the next Zelda game for the next generation console. Just using Breath of the Wild as a direct comparison, DLC for Tears of the Kingdom would have added close to another full year of development time, which would put off the release of a next-gen Zelda that much longer. I think Nintendo prioritized the impact of next-gen Zelda more than the impact of Tears of the Kingdom DLC now, and I kinda get it. Now that Zelda exists as a lot more mainstream than it used to be, and has the potential to be a real system seller, they probably want to get it on their next generation console as soon as possible. Along with Mario, Mario Kart, Pokemon, whatever else, right? The big system sellers that Nintendo knows they need to rely on in order to sell a new piece of hardware. At the same time, it looks like Nintendo wants this console transition to be pretty smooth. They're talking about it as more of an iterative version of the Switch, which kind of suggests that the overall concept and design goals of the system aren't too different from what we've already seen, and it'll likely be compatible with Switch games. Combine that with the comments saying that they do not want to be bound by a traditional console lifecycle, which, I mean, that can be interpreted in so many different ways, but no matter which way you slice it, it kind of seems like Nintendo understands that the Switch was incredibly successful, second best-selling console of all time, and that they have a huge install base. And even though Nintendo in the past has been addicted to being innovative with their new hardware, for better or for worse, Wii U, it seems like for the first time in a while, they want to play it relatively safe. They'll probably tack on some weird new features, but they already said it's essentially an iterative version of the Switch. I think Nintendo understands that the Switch has still been selling pretty well these last couple of years, and there's a lot of relatively casual consumers who maybe got it for their kids or whatever and just aren't ready to upgrade hardware again in 2025, or maybe even 2026, 2027. So, because on one hand, it feels like they want to keep the Switch momentum, but on the other hand, they also want to focus on providing as much value as possible towards the next console, making predictions is kind of weird. Like, I don't know if you remember the Wii U days, but back then it was kind of like, yeah, just leave the Wii U in the dust, focus everything on the Switch. Everybody's happy because there were only 4 people that bought a Wii U, and Nintendo didn't feel the need to support the Wii U very much after the Switch came out because everybody wanted a Switch, nobody wanted a Wii U. It was pretty cut and dry. In this case, the Switch was almost too successful, and it's going to be a little hard to transfer all that momentum into the future. On one hand, they need to keep their brand relevant, and they want to take advantage of the Switch install base and of their popularity, strike while the iron's hot, come out with a new product while people still care, but also understand that not everybody is ready to upgrade from it because it is so popular. Maybe I sound crazy, but I kind of feel like we're getting both from Nintendo right now. And I feel like this is really evidenced by the fact that so far, we have been getting remasters and smaller games. We don't have anything big on the horizon outside of Metroid Prime 4, which, believe me, I'll get to that. So that's sort of the backdrop for my predictions today. I think Nintendo does have plans for the Switch still. I think they do want to continue that momentum, but I also think that the big announcements, the bombshells, the Megaton announcements, the big mainline sequels of their main series, we're likely not seeing anything in that front until we get closer to the next generation. I also think that a lot of these games are likely going to be cross-gen, just like how Breath of the Wild was. Again, this is to make that transition a little bit smoother. They want to support the next-gen console, just like Breath of the Wild. If you didn't own a Wii U and you didn't own a Switch, but you wanted to play Breath of the Wild, nobody bought the Wii U to go play Breath of the Wild. Everybody just jumped on Switch because it's the newest thing, it's the better value proposition, it runs better, and that's kind of what we're going to see here, I think. Not that there's anybody who doesn't own a Switch who might already want one, but I think Nintendo sort of wants to have a foot on each side of the door for a year or two. Because while they want to pour as much value into the next-gen library as possible, they also want to serve the massive Switch install base that already exists, because they understand that this console transition is a delicate process. There's a lot of consumers that they can still profit from who aren't ready to upgrade yet. Having some games, not all of their big releases, but some of the earlier ones, release on both consoles is an easy way to market to the enthusiasts who are looking forward to a console upgrade with better versions of their biggest releases, but also still reap the harvest from the huge Switch install base that isn't ready to upgrade just yet. How long Nintendo wants to support both consoles will likely come down to how confident they are in their next console catching on. Once it becomes clear that they can really market it, Switch support will begin to drop. If it's a challenge getting it to catch on, we may see Switch support for even a couple more years. I'm thinking very similar to what we're seeing from the PS4, still receiving some support years into the PS5 lifecycle. That's my prediction. So because I don't think that the big announcements are coming until we see this next console, because a lot of these announcements are either going to be exclusive to next gen or cross-gen, that means that I think this upcoming Nintendo Direct that should be coming out any day now is mostly going to be smaller games. It is mostly going to be remasters, remakes, ports, and maybe some spin-offs if they're outsourced. Think in the vein of Hyrule Warriors, or Kirby always has all sorts of spin-offs coming out. And of course, we have a long history of really random stuff happening, like, Cadence of Hyrule was a really random thing nobody could have predicted. Stuff like that. We don't know what kind of surprises have been cooking up. I just don't think we're seeing the next Donkey Kong Country. I don't think we're seeing Mario Odyssey 2. You know what I mean? I think it's pretty likely we might see another Kirby remake, kind of like, we saw Return to Dreamland Deluxe, something like that. I think Metroid Prime 2 remaster is actually pretty likely. At least I hope so. I hope they're doing the whole trilogy. It feels wrong to just do the first one and not do the other two, considering how good Metroid Prime Remastered was. We may get some more of those Wii U games, specifically the Zelda games, right? Twilight Princess HD, Wind Waker HD. I'm actually doing a video on Twilight Princess coming to the Switch, which I will link once that video is posted. So check that out if you want my thoughts on it. Spoilers, I don't actually want it on Switch. There's more to it than that, but anyway. That's the kind of stuff I think we'll be seeing is mostly remasters, kind of like we've been getting. I don't know if it's going to be Mario stuff, because I feel like they've done everything Mario related already, but we might see the Zelda games. We might see 3DS games. And honestly, I wouldn't even put it past them to do maybe a full-on remake of something, Maybe we're getting, a Super Metroid remake in the Dread style, right? With, some shared assets built on the same engine, something that could be made in 3 years, something like that. And don't get me wrong, that would be a really hype announcement. That would be super cool. But I do think this Direct is being hyped up a lot, and I just don't think it's going to be full of the next big thing that a lot of people are thinking. I think at most we might see 1 or 2 big mainline sequels, and I'm not totally sure what those would be. I think there's no chance they're going to release like an Animal Crossing, right? I am positive there's an Animal Crossing in development, but I'm also positive that they're saving it for next gen. Things like that. If I had to make a couple specific predictions, I think we are probably getting something Metroid related, either a remake or a remaster, along the lines of perhaps like a Super Metroid remake or something to that effect. Something probably done by Mercury Steam, but not necessarily Metroid 6. I also think that we're likely getting Metroid Prime 2. I'm actually going to go ahead and say that's likely, but maybe that's more wishful thinking than anything. I think we could see something along the lines of like a Pikmin spinoff or Kirby spinoff, something random like that they tend to throw in there. And one that I would actually be surprised if they don't do it kind of soon is actually another Hyrule Warriors. I think Nintendo's pretty confident in that idea. I think after Tears of the Kingdom, it gives them another excuse to do, an Age of Calamity type game. Maybe it's another prequel or sequel or, something that plays off of the Zonai lore, that sort of thing, right? The other one I'm going to go ahead and say is Fire Emblem. Yeah, we're probably getting a brand new Fire Emblem or a remake just because that's what Fire Emblem does. Fire Emblem is inevitable. But as far as big sequels and things, I just don't think we're getting a lot of that. I think anything really big that Nintendo wants to make a big push for is likely going to be saved until closer to next gen. And it might be cross-gen, meaning it'll still come to Switch, but they won't talk about it until the next console is coming out, in my opinion. And I think we can apply that same sort of logic to some other games, which sort of brings me to my final point, Metroid Prime 4. So Metroid Prime 4 is kind of the elephant in the room. That's the game everybody's talking about. I'm going to go ahead and say, no, I do not think we're seeing Metroid Prime 4 in this Direct. And that's because, again, I think it's going to be cross-gen. I think after all this time, Nintendo being perfectly quiet about it, they haven't teased it. It's still relevant. They still officially plan on releasing it on Switch. And actually, I do think it's still coming to Switch, but I think it's cross-gen. After Metroid Dread and just the general success of the Switch having a lot more attention on some of Nintendo's smaller series than they've historically gotten, same with like Pikmin and some other games, Nintendo sees an opportunity here for Metroid to be a lot more popular than it's been. Metroid Dread was the best-selling Metroid game. I think part of that is the marketing was pretty good and it was a good game and all that. But part of it was just the sheer fact that the Switch has a huge install base. It has people looking at it. Every Nintendo game on Switch has a huge amount of eyes on it automatically. And as long as those games are good and marketed competently, it's going to be fairly successful. And that's kind of the pattern we've seen with Nintendo's releases. Again, I don't think Metroid Prime 4 being the swan song of the Switch is the best route for Nintendo to take when everybody is looking forward to next gen. I think Nintendo's going to keep doing remasters and smaller projects, things that are, been in development for a while and are wrapping up now, which you could argue Metroid Prime 4 is that, assuming it's not still in development hell. But I think Nintendo's taking the smart approach in, my opinion, some random dude, right? But I think Nintendo is saying, hey, let's hold off on this. Let's give it the spotlight that it really deserves, because we have an opportunity here for Metroid to be a lot bigger than it's ever been. There is so much hype surrounding this. There's so much mystique surrounding this because, it has been in development hell. It's been announced years ago. I still think it's going to be cross-gen. I think there's likely going to be a Switch version, but I think just like Breath of the Wild, there's going to be a prettier, better running version on next gen, and it'll have that kind of spotlight as a Switch 2 launch title. That's genuinely my prediction. And because of that, I don't think we're seeing it this month, because I don't think we'll be seeing it until we see some more details on the next console, personally. Considering that Nintendo said that they plan on still supporting the Switch somewhat for a while without being bound by the traditional concept of a platform lifecycle, I don't think that's too outside the box to think that we might get a major Switch release next year when it's also cross-gen for the other console. So I'm a big Metroid fan. I would love to see Metroid Prime 4 tomorrow, and I would be so happy to be proven wrong, but I kind of feel like that's the direction they're going to go with it. That being said, I'm really looking forward to this Direct. I'm looking forward to seeing how they're going to surprise us, because I do think no matter what, we're going to be surprised. But if I were you, I would temper my expectations a little bit. I don't think we're going to be completely blown away by anything massive. I just think it's going to paint an interesting picture for how the Switch era comes to a close. I kind of think that Mario Wonder was its swan song, and I'm perfectly happy with that. And there's going to be some cool games to grab this year, but overall, I think Nintendo's got a lot of really awesome stuff cooking for the Switch 2. We haven't seen anything from the 3D Mario team for a while. They've got to be underway on the next Zelda for at least a year now. There's probably a new 2D Metroid in the works alongside Metroid Prime 4, considering how successful Dread was. We're going to get 50 Fire Emblem games. I think the first year or two of Switch 2 is going to be looking pretty good. That said, what do you think? I wanted to get my thoughts on this out pretty quick because we're probably seeing the Direct really soon, so I kind of want to hit that algorithm while I can. So anyway, thanks for listening. I love you all. God bless. Remember to spread positivity and push possibility.